What if the sudden anxiety you felt this morning, or the intense craving for sugar you had yesterday, isn't entirely yours? What if your body is actively remembering a famine, a war, or a terrifying escape that happened decades before you were even born?
It sounds like science fiction, doesn't it? The idea that we are walking around haunted by the biological ghosts of our ancestors. For the longest time, the scientific consensus was that our inheritance was a closed book. You get your DNA from your parents, the genetic letters are locked in, and that sequence is your absolute destiny. But modern science is uncovering an entirely different layer of human biology, and it is changing everything we thought we knew.
Right? And it completely shatters how we look at health, trauma, and even human evolution. We are talking about epigenetics, the hidden chemical layer that sits right on top of our DNA. It turns out the severe hardships our grandparents faced might actually leave a biological fingerprint on us today. So, we are going to dive deep into this genetic ghost. How does ancestral trauma shape our physical and mental health right now? And more importantly, if we are carrying the weight of history in our cells, are we doomed to keep repeating it, or can we rewrite the code?
To really grasp the magnitude of this, we have to completely stop thinking of DNA as a rigid blueprint. It is much more accurate to think of your DNA as a massive, infinite library of possibilities. Your genes are the books sitting on the shelves, but the environment acts as the librarian, constantly deciding which books actually get pulled down and read.
I love that analogy. So, the words inside the books never change, but whether a specific book is left on a dusty shelf or placed right on the display table depends entirely on what is happening outside the body. Things like nutrition, stress, sleep, toxins, and even our social environment.
Exactly. And the mechanism doing the sorting is epigenetics. When we experience things like severe stress or malnutrition, the body attaches chemical markers, like methyl groups, to our DNA. It is essentially the body highlighting specific survival instructions. If you are freezing, the body highlights genes for fat storage. If you are under physical attack, it highlights genes for hypervigilance, cortisol production, and immune response.
Which makes perfect biological sense for survival in the moment. If you are running from a predator, you absolutely want your nervous system to be on high alert. You want that inflammation pathway ready to heal a wound instantly. But the really unsettling part is what happens when the threat goes away. The molecular scars of that stress might not fade with the danger.
And that is where the story gets incredibly profound. The human nervous system evolved to preserve survival information. It does not just want to keep you alive today, it wants to prepare your offspring for the exact kind of world they are about to enter. Researchers began to notice that extreme environmental experiences can leave measurable marks on gene regulation systems. And the evidence strongly suggests these effects can ripple out across generations.
This brings up one of the most fascinating and heartbreaking natural experiments in modern history. The Dutch hunger winter. During World War II, parts of the Netherlands experienced a brutal, severe starvation period. And decades later, scientists started looking at the children who were in the womb during that specific famine.
The findings were absolutely staggering. Those children who were exposed to extreme nutritional stress during critical windows of fetal development grew up to have significantly higher risks of metabolic disease, obesity, glucose dysregulation, and cardiovascular problems compared to siblings born before or after the famine.
Because their bodies were biologically anticipating a world with no food. The epigenetic markers essentially sent a message saying, hold on to every single calorie you can find, because the world is starving.
Precisely. It is an evolutionary forecast. The body made a prediction based on the mother's environment. But here is the tragedy of that adaptation. Those children were eventually born into a post-war world where food became abundant. They had a biological survival program optimized for famine, but they were operating inside a calorie-rich modern environment.
A complete biological mismatch. It makes you look at modern diseases through such a different lens. We often judge things like obesity, severe anxiety, or chronic fatigue as personal failures or just random malfunctions of the body. But what if the body is actually doing exactly what it was programmed to do? It is just responding perfectly to a world that no longer exists.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. Evolution is incredibly slow, but modern society changed in the blink of an eye. Our physiology is still carrying the echoes of ancient scarcity, fear, and uncertainty. When we see skyrocketing rates of chronic inflammation, sleep disruption, and metabolic syndrome today, we are likely looking at ancient survival strategies clashing violently with modern civilization.
And it is not just food and metabolism. The research involving psychological trauma is equally mind-bending. Studies looking at the descendants of people who survived wars, genocides, or extreme chronic stress show heightened vulnerabilities to anxiety and altered stress hormone regulation.
Yes, the intergenerational transmission of trauma. While the field is still scientifically complex and constantly evolving, the idea that environmental experience shapes future biology is becoming impossible to ignore. If your ancestors lived in a constant state of terror, passing down a hyperreactive stress response is actually a biological favor. It keeps you alert to danger.
A favor that feels a lot more like a curse when you are just trying to answer an urgent email in a perfectly safe office building, but your heart is racing like you are being hunted by a lion. It is almost philosophical when you step back and look at it. The human body is not just a biological machine. It functions partly like a historical archive. We are literally walking around carrying the memories of what our ancestors survived.
We absolutely are. We are the living, breathing continuation of their survival. The nervous system evolved not merely to survive the present, but to anticipate the future based on past conditions. The body is constantly asking, what kind of world should future generations prepare for?
So inheritance is so much more than just eye color, height, or a predisposition to baldness. It includes stress adaptation itself. But this brings us to the big, hopeful question. If my biology is anticipating a war or a famine that isn't actually happening, am I just permanently condemned to anxiety and metabolic issues? How do we tell our genetic ghost that the war is over?
By changing the signals we send to our DNA. This is perhaps the most exciting aspect of the entire field of epigenetics. These chemical tags are highly responsive. They are not a life sentence. Things like high-quality sleep, nutrient-dense diets, consistent exercise, stress reduction, and deep social connection can actively influence epigenetic regulation over time.
So prioritizing a good night's sleep or going for a run isn't just about feeling good in the moment or burning calories. You are actively rewriting the highlights in your genetic instruction manual. You are turning down the volume on the trauma response.
Exactly. Biology is endlessly adaptive. We are learning that optimizing your circadian rhythm and metabolic health sends powerful signals of safety to your cells. Genes are not absolute destiny. The environment remains enormously important. Epigenetics represents biological responsiveness, not fatalism.
Which is exactly why the future of medicine is shifting. It will no longer be just about reacting to a symptom when it pops up. It will be about understanding your inherited biological context. We are seeing this explosion of health intelligence tools, wearables tracking our heart rate variability, our sleep stages, our stress recovery. But having all that data without understanding the context is just noise.
Right. A wearable device does not improve your health on its own. Interpretation does. The real breakthrough happens when we can integrate genomics, epigenetics, wearable data, and metabolic profiling. When we understand the unique biological history of the person standing in front of us, we can move toward truly personalized prevention. Because understanding human biology requires understanding biological history itself.
It is a profound shift in perspective. To realize that inside every single human cell, history is whispering, not as a metaphor, but as a tangible biological reality. Our bodies remember the scarcity, the fear, and the survival of those who came before us.
And recognizing that is the first step toward true healing. We have to realize that we are not just the products of our own individual choices, we are the carriers of inherited biological stories. But the beautiful part is that the final chapter has not been written. Because just as trauma can be inherited, the adaptations we make today, the peace we cultivate, and the health we build can also become the inheritance we leave behind. Resilience is just as hereditary as fear.
Resilience is just as hereditary as fear. I cannot think of a more powerful thought to leave off on. The genetic ghost does not have to haunt us. It can simply remind us of what we have survived and what we have the power to change. Thank you for joining us on this exploration into the deep code of human health. Until next time, Kikis, keep listening to what your body is trying to tell you.